Welcome to this special two-part series of the Multicultural Mindset broadcast with Dr. LaVerne Hanes Collins, a licensed professional counselor, award-winning trainer, and keynote speaker. Dr. Collins is the author of two books, Overlooked, Counselor Insights for the Unspoken Issues in Black American Life, and The Fruit of Your Pain, Experiencing Spiritual Renewal Through Seasons of Struggle. Dr. Collins has also been a featured monthly columnist in the American Counseling Association's Counseling Today magazine with her Honoring Diversity column. This episode of the Multicultural Mindset is a celebratory one-year anniversary edition of the broadcast with a special co-host, Michael Harris, talking to Dr. Collins about her newly released book, The Fruit of Your Pain. Now, here are Michael Harris and Dr. Collins.
Good morning, Dr. Collins.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
I am wonderful today. It is truly an honor to be in this space with you. I'm grateful that you've chosen me and allowed me the privilege of doing this interview. I know you're usually on the other side of giving the interviews, so it's a wonderful thing now to have you on the other side. How do you feel about that today?
I'm glad it's you because
Okay.
I'm actually much more nervous on the interviewee side than on the interviewer side. But I'm
Ah,
glad to have you. We've known each other for a long, long time, and I'm
absolutely.
glad that you were available and willing to be the co-host today or the host today while I serve as the guest.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, Dr. Collins and I, we have these off-scripted interviews quite frequently during the year. So what's probably different for both of us now is that somebody else is looking into it and looking at us doing it.
Yes.
But we regularly have these interview sessions about her work, about my life. She's my therapist that I never pay, and but she's on my personal retainer for the things that God places in her heart to share, not only with me, but with all of His creation. And it's for that reason, we're here today to talk about what I think is, and I've shared this with her, um, a work in the form of a book that needs to get in every hand and every heart of every person in not only America, every person in the world. The Fruit of Your Pain is Dr. Collins' a new offering to this world and this creation. And I'll say creation because it indeed is a creation. God has created all of us. And so it's her offering to this world from her personal experiences, from her wisdom, from all that she's gleaned. And when I tell you, those of you who are watching, it is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful gift. I am blessed to have gone through the process of reading it in just a couple of days. And I'm not the type of reader I am, Dr. Collins, is it has to be something that I'm engaged with to really want to read it. And because I glean my information from so many different places, sometimes it's hard for me to sit down with one thing in my hand and just use that as a source. But I'm so glad that I did. And I told you before, I read this book in maybe 2 days, half of it in one day, because I couldn't put it down. And it was engaging. It touched places in my heart and in my life that I didn't know needed to be touched. It brought clarity, it brought instruction, and I would say most of all, it brought encouragement and empowerment. When I put it down and closed the pages, I felt that I had something that I could do something with.
I thank you for that. I am so glad to hear that it's having that impact because that's been my prayer. So thank you for saying that. And you're right. I do believe it is divinely inspired. It was important to me to create a blend of counseling, psychology, and theology, which is why I got into the work as a Christian counselor in the first place,
Mhm.
because I feel like it's important for someone providing counseling services, especially Christian counseling, to really have an understanding of the heart of God, but also the mind of people. And I'm not faulting or criticizing anyone who has one degree or one specialization, but not the other. But I knew that for what the call that was on my life, I needed both. And what you're saying, I think, validates my heart's desire and hopefully the desire of the Lord as well, that it would be a penetrating work that brings transformation and encouragement. The human mind touching the heart of God, and the heart of God touching the human mind.
That's a great way to put it. And I'll interject as a man of God that I believe God is pleased. I
Oh,
believe God is pleased.
wow. Well, thank you, Rev.
So let's dive into it.
Okay.
There are many things that I have to ask you, not for my purpose, but for the purpose of our listeners tuning in, who might want to engage on how this project and why it came to be. So we'll dive into some questions that I have that I want to engage you on. And as we do, we'll talk. And if I feel like I want to kind of go off, then I'll go off the rails with you. And but I'm hoping that whoever's watching, what they'll glean and gain from this session is more insight into who you are as a woman, as a counselor, as a woman of God, who bringing these experiences to the table from a both clinical aspect and a spiritual aspect, and then a personal aspect. Because in my estimation, all three are engaged in this work. You can't talk about the fruit of your pain without talking about yourself. You can't give me a solution about the fruit of your pain unless your education provided the clinical and the medical, if you will, experience to speak to those things. And then spiritually, you can't tie a bow around it and then speak to my destiny and my purpose without being engaged yourself with who God is and what he's able to do in our lives. So,
You just preached that, I'll just say.
I didn't have that written down. So let's dive into it. Why did you decide to release the second edition? You did a first edition, and my understanding that's been what, 20 years?
That's been over 20 years
Over 20
ago.
years.
Yes. That first edition was written on the heels of a tumultuous year.
Mhm.
I actually had to wait about 6 or 7 years after such a traumatic year, which I'll describe in a minute, before I could actually sit down and write because the year was so devastating.
Mhm.
It was 1993, Good Friday of 1993, and a brain aneurysm that I did not know I had ruptured.
Wow.
And
And
my children,
subsequently, I met you that
right after that,
right after that, that
few
year after.
years,
Yeah, a
few
couple of years
years
after.
after that.
Yes.
Exactly, exactly. So this is 1993. I have two children, ages like 7 and 8. I'm married. I'm an only child, so there are no siblings. And I I believe that my healing there was like a parable,
Mm.
um, because I should have I should have not been able to move forward and earn two more degrees. I was in the first or second semester of my master's program getting this degree in counseling. So I had to finish that semester. I missed a semester, but they were concerned about my memory loss or memory and memory loss. And I really, medically speaking, um, I don't want to say I shouldn't have survived, because the fact that I survived means I should have survived. It was God's intention for me to survive. I believe that. But at the same time, that I was able to proceed and do more suggests to me that this healing was a parable, that even when crisis strikes and trauma strikes and
Mhm.
things seem to like they should set you back, God is able to spiritually restore what seemingly should have been arrested and
Wow.
interrupted. And spiritually speaking, the year that followed was a year that could have, and for many people, it does interrupt their relationship with God. Because while I was healing, Mike, the day after I got home from the hospital, my only uncle passed away. A few months, 3 months later, my mother, who had just been diagnosed with cancer, passed away. Three
Wow.
months later, my father-in-law fell, hit his head, passed away. A few months later, my father, 7 months after my mother, went to the hospital thinking it was a stomach problem, died in the hospital. 3 months later, my grandmother, now we're at the roughly at the point of 1 year from my mother's death, my grandmother passed away. I literally lost all the biological elders in my family in the season when I was trying to heal from the aneurysm in that time period. So the fruit of your pain edition 1 was the story of my spiritual recovery. It wasn't about me. It's never been about me, but it was what I learned because I looked at so many people who were having, I don't want to judge anybody's problems as minor because a problem is a problem, but who were dealing with what should have been deemed as lesser issues, normal challenges of life, and they were literally walking away from the faith, literally
Mm.
just walking away from God because their landlord decided to sell the house and they had to move or something like that. Just utterly devastated to the point of losing faith. And I recognized some of what God was trying to do in me, and the book came through, well, the first edition came from that experience. What I recognized in writing that first edition was that books written about pain and suffering and trauma in the mainstream do not consider Black theology.
Mm.
Black
Wow.
theology is a liberation theology, and liberation theology tends not just to be spiritual, but tends to have a very
Mm.
material and physical and social context. And as a result, the books on pain and suffering and loss and grief and trauma were missing it with our people.
Mm.
So I knew that, I recognized that. That was the reason for the first edition. Now, a good friend of mine who's transitioned and I'm sure is in heaven now, said to me, she said, "This is not the end of this." She said, "You've got more. There's going to be more. This might be the first half." And I'm thinking, "Oh no, I don't want any more loss. I don't want any more trauma.
Mhm.
I don't want anything else I have to write
That's
about
the only
pain.
fruit I want.
That's the only fruit I want." Exactly. But you know my story, and you know the second edition, although it's decades later, includes my pain and my growth through a devastating loss of my son. I lost my son to depression, and that was in 2000, excuse me, that was, yeah, 2019. And once again, it's taken 6 years to be able to sit down and process the past 6 years of processing. But um, I will say this, my perspective shifted in this way. I recognized that I survived the aneurysm and those losses. This loss required more than just survival.
Mm.
This loss required a totally different level of healing because this was my baby. This loss was my child. So this experience had to take me deeper in my understanding, in my healing, in my faith, and hopefully in my fruitfulness. So people, uh, today's audience, I'll say, not the audience 20 years ago, today's audience especially is facing trauma and grief and cultural struggles. And this edition speaks to now.
Wow. Listen, so if I can interject something, because I do know you, and I do know a lot of your story. Um, a part of that pain that you didn't add was you went through a divorce even prior to your son passing away. Which in
Yeah.
itself, you know,
Is,
is a
yeah,
pain
painful.
point. This family, because
Absolutely.
you go all the way back to '93, and you started this conversation. I was married.
Hmm.
I had two kids. you
Hmm.
know I know your former husband. You were
Hmm.
both in ministry together.
Hmm.
So so now fast forward prior to your son even being taken from you. You go through the pain point of having to divide your family,
Yeah.
um, having to deal with the pain that that caused,
Yeah.
not only you
It
personally.
was, yeah. It
Yeah.
was, I mean, it was essentially, it felt like the family fell apart.
Yes, 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 yes,
Divorce has that effect by itself.
yes.
But within 2 years after that divorce, just about 2 years after that divorce, we lose our son.
Yeah.
So yeah, um, the last the 20 years between edition one and the second edition were filled with,
Yeah.
a lot. I'll just say a lot.
And
But I
what struck
Mhm.
me too is that even in your personal experiences that you add to this, because one of my questions to you was going to be, okay, why did you release the second edition?
Mhm.
But kind of what makes this book different, from other books about grief and suffering. But one of the things that I'd like you to speak to is not just your personal pain, the fruit of your pain, but the pain that you're also carrying in this time for others. Because now it's
Mm,
not just your pain, you know.
mm,
So you're carrying
yeah.
the pain of your children, you're carrying the pain of the others in your circle who, though you've experienced those personal losses, they've also experienced them. And if I know you, and I do, those people come to you and say, "Hey, Laverne, you know, what can I do? Be strong for me. What's the encouragement? Speak to that, in the overall context of not just the fruit of my pain, but just the fruit of pain that you're also carrying along with your own for others."
You know, I didn't, it's a great question, because I didn't recognize that was happening
Mm,
because consciously I felt I had such a heaviness and I was carrying such a weight. I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody. I didn't feel
mm,
like I could do anything. I didn't, in fact, I felt so much like a failure in losing my son to something like depression.
mm,
I mean, I'm his mom, a minister of the gospel, a mental health professional.
mm,
I train other counselors. The weight that I felt was so heavy that I didn't want to do any of those things ever again because I felt like if I failed in my own family, how in the world was I going to help anybody else? How could I help carry anybody else's emotional pain? I was just ready to hang up the towel. And what I found out was people found encouragement and strength in the way I was going through it, I suppose.
mm. Wow.
I was clearly relying on my faith. And I'll give you one good example of me not even knowing that I was helping anybody else in that way. I was teaching at the university here that semester, and I took 2 weeks off. I had a substitute come in. It was my early in the semester, semester started in January. This is the first week of February. And 2 days before I lost my son, I lost one of my very, very, very best friends to cancer. And then 48 hours later, I get this call about my son. So I was a wreck. And I took these 2 weeks off from teaching. And when I returned, and for the sake of transparency, I felt it was only fair to let my students know I'm not at full strength. I told them about the deaths. I said, I'm going to try to finish this semester. I want to make this a good semester for you because you deserve my best. If I'm not able to give my best at all times, I want you to know why. And I finished the semester almost begrudgingly because I didn't feel worthy. I didn't feel like I could. I felt like I was a failure in all my roles. And the end of the semester, my students gave me an envelope that said, "We have all pitched in because you have been so wonderful this
Wow.
semester. And
Wow.
we have pitched in and we have donated monies to the campus counseling center for
Wow.
people who can't afford help to get help. And we've donated it in memory of your son because
Wow.
he didn't get all the help that he needed." My son, as you know, was on the West Coast. I was on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And they said, "Thank you for showing us
Wow.
how to do this."
Wow.
And that blew me away because I saw the semester as a failure.
Wow.
So, did I know I was helping other people? Did I feel like I was carrying anything for anybody else? No, I didn't think I even had the strength.
Wow.
But I guess that should have been an evidence that there was fruit right then
Yeah.
to my pain.
Yeah. Wow. So what makes this different? Again, the market is full of books about pain, and listen, some of them are very good. Uh, and I think we live in a society that is bringing mental health to the forefront. You know,
Yes.
unlike when I grew up, and definitely when you grew up. Not that we're that far apart, but you know, mental illness in the
I was going to say,
'70s.
watch it.
Yeah, mental illness in the '70s, and probably with you growing up in
In the
in the
60s.
in
Yeah.
the '60s, it was a padded room or a room in the back, in the
Yeah.
dark,
Yeah.
literally. Because I'm a child myself of mental health issues and struggles as a child. So there are so many books out there today. You can
Hmm.
probably go in the grocery store and the pet store and find a book on
Hmm.
on self-help and what you need to do. So,
Hmm.
why is Fruit of Your Pain different from the books out there on grief and suffering that other men and women of God have engaged in, counselors, in terms of solution? And not that we're detracting or
Hmm.
taking anything away from those works, but in
Hmm.
your mind, why is this different from an informational and maybe even a clinical aspect? Because we know it's different because you're LaVerne and there's no other LaVerne. God created one. So that's why it's different. But why is it different from those perspectives?
There are a couple of reasons why, and I'll start with this mantra, what I'm calling a theme of this book, and the theme is that strength without healing is just survival.
Mm, wow.
Strength without healing is just survival. So strength we think of as in our circles spiritual, our spiritual strength, right? Um, and that's we need that. That's what's gotten me through. But without healing, which is the understanding from a mental health and counseling and psychology perspective. So strength without healing is just survival. We
Mm,
need both. Survival says keep moving, wear the mask, appear to be strong.
mm,
But healing says no, stop, feel it, feel the pain, lean into it, not away from it. Allow community into your pain. Allow God into your pain.
mm,
Survival is is about being strong, but healing is about transformation
yes. Yeah.
in that strength.
Yeah.
So strength, we can, the strong Black man, the strong Black
Mhm.
woman without healing, it's just survival. And too many of us live in survival mode because it feels safer, but God is calling us to healing. He's calling us to an abundant life and the fruit that comes from healing
Mm.
combined with strength. So even beyond that, this is the second thing, even beyond that is the image that the Lord gave me years ago of the garden imagery, that our heart is God's garden. And we use that imagery throughout the entire book. It's relatable, it's visual, and it's scripturally based. And what it does is it blends, I think, the clinical expertise of being a trauma informed counselor with my ministerial voice. It addresses cultural dimensions, the weight of generational survival as a people, that strong Black woman, that strong Black man, our expectations, the trauma of communities of color, and the theology within the traditional Black church, where we are not always honest about our anger at God, where
Yes.
we would rather change our story than explore what really needs to be changed, which might be our understanding and our perspective.
Yeah.
I believe this book will help people to recognize that when and the points when they feel angry at God, we don't have a fallen God. We live in a fallen world.
Mhm.
When someone's angry at God, it's because they think that God has failed them. Well, it's not that God has failed them, but it comes down to a matter of expectations. Your expectations of God might have been out of balance or whatever. You may have been looking for something physical or material or cultural,
Mhm.
something something temporary,
Yeah.
essentially,
Make me
and
feel
not
good.
looking for the eternal and the spiritual.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the work of God is in our hearts, which is his garden. And that work is spiritual because Christ said his kingdom is not of this world. And yet, what we're usually disappointed about are things of this world.
Mm. Wow. There's so much in what you just said. The strength without healing is just survival, and so this book is different because it engages, even me as a reader. Um, I think I called you, as I was reading or texting you, and and I'm like, I think I asked you, like, LaVerne, what are you doing? What are you doing to me? and and I said that because, and you just brought it out, very rarely, at least in my reading, and I've read a lot, you don't read many things that engage so many things that encompass who we are as people.
Mhm.
And you just said it in your explanation, the cultural aspects of pain are different. And, race is a thing from a cultural perspective. Um, Denzel, in an interview, someone was interviewing him and asked him about a movie. And so the references he gave were Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg. He said Martin Scorsese could have written Schindler's List, and Steven Spielberg could have probably done a good job with Godfather because of their talent. He said, but the cultural differences, not the racial differences, are what make the works different. And he brought out an analogy because he was speaking to Viola Davis. I think they were interviewing him about fences. He said, only she and I know the smell of a hot comb in the morning on black hair. And he said, so the misunderstanding from people is that it's racial. And it's not racial because I'm black. He said it's cultural.
Cultural.
And so what you've brought to this work, in my estimation, is something that me as a Black man by race,
Mhm.
but it's not limited to that. You're speaking to culture and the differences in that, and how we handle grief, and how my fight or flight is different than
Mhm.
my colleague who may be
Mhm.
Caucasian.
Mhm.
Their fight or flight is different.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
how we're handling survival, you know,
Mhm.
um, is different. And
Yep.
so I love that, because this offering kind of it hits that right on top of the head with a big giant hammer and nails it in the ground, and I just wanted to rip up the papers and say, you know. But you mentioned something I want to dive into. I want to dive into so much here. Um, so, and I'm kind of jumping ahead because I didn't want to ask this until later, but you jumped until you mentioned it. So you
Okay.
wrote a chapter, one of my favorite ones, about being angry with God, and you
Mhm.
mentioned it a little bit, but
Mhm.
dive into that a little bit more. Why add a chapter about being angry with God? Because as a Christian, you are, I am, and whoever's watching, you don't have to be a Christian, but probably in everyone's faith, the commonality in is one thing you don't do is that you don't accuse God falsely. You know, um, matter of fact, you just leave him alone in heaven, and you kind of acquiesce to what his will is, or what you think his will is, whether that's written in the Gita, the Quran, or the Torah, or whatever those
Mhm.
books, that you're gaining information from. You put God there, and you leave him
Mhm.
alone there, and you
Mhm.
certainly don't folly with the sin of being angry with God. So how
Mhm.
dare you put that in a book about pain, you know, Dr. Collins? What is wrong with you? Why would why would you be blasphemous
Mm,
tempt tempt the hand of an angry God by putting a book in a chapter in there about being angry with God? Talk to us about that.
yeah. Well, people fall away from faith because they're angry at God. And I don't believe that you can heal from
Mm,
anything that you don't deal with.
wow.
And many people of faith experience anger at God, feel guilty about saying it, so they never deal with it.
Mm,
A number of years ago, as a counselor, I started providing trainings. I provide trainings, and you've been in some of
mhm.
my
Yes.
trainings that are targeted toward mental health professionals, counselors, pastors, social workers, therapists, etc. And one of my signature trainings is cognitive behavioral therapy for clients who are angry at God. Cognitive behavioral therapy is simply the brand of therapy where you talk through what your beliefs, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions are. That's it in general, in a nutshell. So, how to work with clients who are angry at God. And I uncovered a research project that came out of Baylor University. Dr. Frost and Dr. Bader, their research on how Americans view God showed that there were four different personalities
Mm,
that Americans ascribe to God that shapes their expectations of how God interacts with them. And A,
wow.
B, C, and D. The authoritative God, the benevolent God, the critical God, and the distant God. I won't go into that because I want folks to read the book and get this for themselves. But what it boils down to is that we all have these expectations of God, and when those expectations don't match a person's experience, then
Mm,
people are mad at God because their expectations were unmet.
man, yeah.
And, faith is a matter of exchange. I give you my faith, and then you're supposed to give me what I had faith to believe
Mhm.
for.
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes.
and the problem is that when I looked at Frost and Bader's model, I could clearly understand why so many people get angry at God.
Mm,
because one of the underpinnings is of their model is how involved is God in human affairs.
Mm.
And the other component is how critical or versus benevolent is God. And what I noticed in reading their results is that it all kind of depends on which of those four boxes you put God in, depends on what you believe about God's work in the earth,
Mm.
in the earthly realm, not in the spiritual realm.
Spiritual realm, yeah.
Jesus said his kingdom is not of this world. So anger grows when our expectations of what we think God should be doing in the earth clash with our lived reality. So that chapter invites a paradigm shift to
Wow.
stop measuring God only by what he does around us and embrace what he's trying to form and transform within us, within our hearts, which
Wow.
is his garden, our spiritual life, our ability to have love and joy and peace and faith and self-control, meekness and temperance and goodness,
Dr.
our
Collins,
ability.
Dr. Collins,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
gonna
yes.
bring in the band, and whoever's watching, we're just gonna do 30 seconds, a 30-second praise.
Thanks for tuning in to part one of this special broadcast, The Fruit of Your Pain, second edition by Dr. LaVerne Hanes Collins, with her guest host, Michael Harris. Don't miss part 2 of this transformative discussion in the next episode. Use this QR code or link to order your copy of this life-changing book today.